Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're going to be doing a listener request for an Oliver Stone movie. And of course, this being us, we're doing an Oliver Stone movie that nobody talks about, which is The Hand, which is a possessed killer hand movie. But before we get into that, a little kind of upfront news here. This is actually an episode we're pre-recording because the week this comes out, Travis will be kind of taking a vacation, and we want that to be the focus of his time. So we decided to record this early and kind of bank it. So we won't have any comments of the week or anything for last week's episode on Joker, but we will be doing all of that in next week's episode on Ang Lee's Hulk. So we haven't forgotten you, and I'm very excited to hear the responses to Joker and our takes on it, and we will be addressing that in the Hulk episode next week. So just wanted to let you all know. And I think that's pretty much all we have to do for preamble, and we can jump right into Oliver Stone's The Hand, because this is written and directed by Oliver Stone. This is his second feature film. He did another feature film, I want to say it's like 4 years before this or something, called Seizure.
Yeah, Seizure came out in 1974. The Hand actually came out little over 6 years later in 1981. The Hand is based on a novel. It's kind of a, I guess you could call it a paperback from hell type book. It's called The Lizard's Tale. It was written by a guy named Mark Brandel. I really don't know much of anything about the book, and I really don't know how accurate an adaptation this movie is of that novel. I haven't done any research on it. I just really wanted to evaluate the movie for what it was.
Well, it's surprising because, obviously we have to focus on Stone a little bit in this episode, and people knowing him and his background as far as a screenwriter and a director. I think it's 2 years after this he gets credited with the script for Scarface. Mm-hmm. I think this is a small period, a window in his career that nobody really talks about. It's everything kind of like Scarface and beyond. And when we got a listener request to do an Oliver Stone thing, we were like, well, what kind of fits in with the GenreVision mold, and what is there that we really want to talk about? And this is a movie that neither you or I had ever seen. I was tangentially aware of it. I just knew it's like, yeah, it's a killer hand movie starring Michael Caine. So checking this out, I was like, well, maybe this is going to be kind of a heightened comic booky, almost creep show, or more accurately, more of kind of the Amicus mold of, Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and all the anthology movies that they did. And I will say, as an overall read of the movie, The Hand, for a killer hand movie, is kind of shockingly straight-faced.
Yeah, it actually approaches it with a level of, I don't know, respectability that I kind of didn't expect, because the material that I had seen from the movie certainly has, I don't know, a veneer of sensationalism. It looked a little bit more sensational, but hey, that's marketing. It's supposed to be sensational to get you to show up. So I was actually surprised at how straight on the movie approaches the material, because I think given what the material is, there are lots of goofier places to go and still remain true to the spirit of what the story is.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the sincere angle is a bad thing. It was just a very kind of surprising one for me. But the basic setup of the movie is that Michael Caine plays this comic book writer and artist, Jonathan Lansdale, who makes this comic strip called Mandro, which is a very thinly veiled type kind of Conan the Barbarian story. Fun fact, the art and everything that was done for the Mandro comics in the movie was done by Barry Windsor Smith, who's a absolute legend in the comics field and was actually doing Marvel's Conan the Barbarian comics at the time he did this movie. So, and then Oliver Stone, of course, would go on to script the Conan the Barbarian movie. And Michael Caine's character, Jonathan Lansdale, is not exactly in a great place with his wife. It seems like their marriage is teetering on the edge of self-destructing.
Yeah, early on in the movie, we get a sense of what their sort of daily domestic life is like, and they're living in the country at the moment, and I think it's like upstate New York or something like that. And they are on their way over, I think, to a friend's house for dinner, and they have an argument in the car. And this is where we're getting Michael Caine's, bigger dramatic line readings right off the start. I wouldn't say it's exactly a subdued performance from him. Like when he yells and screams, it's sort of that classic, Michael Caine, instantly imitatable, well, we obviously do not understand each other, do we?
Right. You are only supposed to blow the bloody doors off, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Very The Trip.
Yeah.
But it's basically his wife arguing that their marriage as it stands needs to be reevaluated. Because his career has sort of reached a turning point. And as they are arguing and driving down the road, they are coming up on, I think there's a truck in front of them, sort of like a flatbed truck in front of them. And as they are trying to get around it, there is a car coming the other way. There is a mishap where his hand is out the window and the rear of the flatbed on the truck clips his right hand off, just boop, takes it right off. And the shot, I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I'm very protective of my hands. Hand gore and hand violence just make me squirm like nothing else. And when his fucking hand came off, I was like, ooh, ouch, ooh, it's pretty nasty.
I think you mentioned that in our most recent AMA episode, where it was like, somebody asked what kind of gore, or stuff kind of gets to you in movies. And you were like, anything with my hands.
Yeah.
Like anything with hand stuff is nasty. As my note says, the de-handing scene is pretty good. It's, it gets smacked off and it's clearly fake, but then we see a lot of blood splurting out of the stump and everything. I'm like, oh, this is appropriately gruesome in a fairly, I don't want to say believable, but it's not a campy way. Like
it's not campy, but it's like melodramatic where they pull over, he falls out of the car. He's clutching his bloody stump. It's spraying blood everywhere. It's not like Kill Bill level of gore, but he's like screaming and wailing and his stump is bleeding and he's got blood dripping down his face. It was one of these moments that at the beginning of the movie, I thought, okay, I'm here for this.
Well, I particularly wanted to bring up the Amicus horror movies, which I'm a big fan of, because I feel like the Hand feels like a movie that's spun out of the Amicus horror movies to me, where it feels like it could have been a segment in one of their anthology movies, because they were all about, okay, we're going to do these kind of outlandish, really over the top, lurid horror stories, but we want people to enjoy them, but also not laugh at them. At the best, laugh with them. And the way that they did that in a lot of those movies was to get really respectable actors to perform in them. Michael Gough is in a bunch of them, Jack Palance, Peter Cushing, all these guys. And Michael Caine's casting, I think, is critical to the Hand working as well as it does, because I think he perfectly gets the tone of the movie in his performance. And in those moments, for example, when he gets de-handed, where he has to
disarm. No.
I think he understands just how big to go. Like, he goes just big enough without tipping over the edge into full-on camp.
Sure, he doesn't go thermonuclear. But the movie definitely has a sense of wicked fun. Like, even before the hand even comes off, there's kind of an icky scene where we see his young daughter poking at a severed lizard's tail outside. And, of course, Jonathan comes up to his daughter and explains that the wriggling of the lizard's tail is just a reflex. It has no sort of cognition. And then she's like, but why does it wriggle faster when my hand gets close? And that's kind of where that scene ends. It's a little icky foreshadowing, and it's exactly why the novel was called The Lizard's Tail. It's, detached from its host. Does this thing have a mind of its own?
Yes, which the hand is going to get into, because even though the hand gets lopped off by this truck, it flies out into a field somewhere and they're not able to recover it.
I was definitely having Bobbit flashbacks.
Right. Yeah. So we get these shots that keep returning to the hand in the field as it's rotting more and getting pecked at by birds and eaten by ants and stuff like that. And one part of the movie that I give a lot of credit to are the special effects, which are done by, this is kind of a powerhouse duo of Carlo Rambaldi and Stan Winston.
Yeah. Carlo Rambaldi, of course, is the mechanical effects genius who did E.T. He did the first Alien. He handled all the mechanical effects inside of Giger's skins, basically.
Possession.
Yes. And then, of course, Stan Winston. Everybody knows Stan Winston is the great Hollywood effects creator. But, coming back to the sort of classicism here, at this point in the movie where he's just had his hand severed and he's in recovery, he's being fitted with a prosthesis. There are 2 black cat scares at this point. By this point in the movie, it's like 2 black cats have jumped out of a shadow and startled the lead character. And it's like, okay, this is that kind of movie where it's starting really simply and it's things we'd seen before. They're pretty good jump scares for 1980. It was probably shot in 1979 and 1980. Like, for the time, they're pretty good. I mean, they hold up. They don't feel cheap and unwarranted. And coming back to effects, I think they're pretty tasteful. They actually do use, I think, a real amputee's limb for the close-ups. Like when he's going to the doctor and he's sort of early in his treatment for the amputation, you do see what looks like a very real amputee's limb in close-up.
Yeah, if it's not real, they did a really good job, but it certainly looks like it. So of course we talking about the cats. I can't remember exactly when this. I think it's shortly after he's lost his hand and he's back at his house. They have this cat, and this was the moment in the movie where I'm like, I don't think this movie is trying to be silly at all, but its inevitable silliness is poking through. Mm-hmm. Where the cat, which I'm assuming is Jonathan Lansdale's cat, kind of freaks out around him, and it just bolts through a plate glass window.
I don't know if it's plate glass, but that fucker just bang right out the kitchen window.
It smashes through a window.
Yeah.
Like, no cat would ever be strong enough to smash through a window like that.
Contraire, I have a video of a cat smashing through a window in a greenhouse.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe if it's that, light pane of glass, but it is so ridiculous. And of course they shoot it in slow motion and everything. And I'm like, I know, at least I believe that the movie is trying to set this up as tension and foreboding. Like, it's an old movie staple of like, the animals sense something's wrong, something's evil. Mm-hmm. But my goodness, is this a dopey moment?
I thought it was funny. And it's one of the things, again, that I didn't find as a negative about the movie, but it just kind of lets you know what sort of time you're in for.
I don't find it negative as much as I do, like, considering how really kind of, like I said at the beginning, straight-faced that this movie's trying to be. This feels like the movie I was assuming a movie about a killer hand would be like. Okay, yeah, a cat jumping through a window because it senses evil. I'm like, yeah, that tracks. But the rest of the movie, that kind of stuff only kind of peeks through in little tiny spurts. Mm-hmm. And it's a bummer because there's stuff in the movie that kind of I bought into the more psychological horror bent that this was clearly trying to go for. There's a moment where Jonathan is having dinner with his mother, and
I think
they're talking.
I'm not sure if it's his mother. I think it's either his agent or manager, Karen.
Okay, because they're talking about his wife, and like he's like, "Oh, you never liked her."
It seems she seems kind of like a motherly figure in his life, but she's the one who shows up later, like when he goes to the office with those storyboards and they're talking about his career.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, this woman, Karen, that he's talking to is, they're getting into his personal life and things like that. And he's trying to move on, and he's actually started to try drawing with his left hand, and it hasn't gone well. So they're sort of trying to find a way forward for Jonathan in his career, and he's having this meeting with Karen, and they're eating lobster, and there is this glorious moment that I kind of wish these things were in the movie a little bit more frequently. They might have overstayed their welcome if they showed up a little bit more frequently. But what is this? I think you probably have the better description of this moment.
Oh, I just in my notes with ending with an exclamation point have the lobster curling.
Yeah,
which is it's not playing the sport curling. It's the legs of the lobster basically, curl up together as if to look like a fist, like a bunch of fingers curling up. And I'm like, okay, now this take on the movie, I'm really interested in. That it is playing very clearly in the psychological realm of, okay, we're seeing things from Jonathan's perspective. That is probably not really happening. Or if it is, obviously he is relating it to his hand.
Sure. But things like this in the movie actually start a little bit earlier, and they start with a little bit more ambiguity, which I liked. After he starts trying to draw with his left hand, he starts to get maybe visions. There are shots in the film of like the hand rotting in the field, like we talked about. He goes to the field where he lost his hand, and this field sequence, there's this really heightened sound design. You hear all the insects and everything like that. The camera is sort of pushing through the grass at foot level. It's very Sam Raimi. I fucking love this sequence. And it's at this point where you're thinking, when he sees, when we see the hand like moving through the field, is this him imagining that? Is this something that's happening diegetically within the film? Or is this like a psychic link between the moving hand and him? The movie doesn't ever spell it out all that directly in that moment. And then when you start to see things like the lobster legs contracting on his plate at dinner with Karen, you're like, okay, this guy's kind of cracked, and maybe the hand is real. Maybe we'll get there later, but the things that he's seeing lend the movie that kind of specific flavor that it has.
And this is what interested me initially when I started watching the movie, was that, oh, okay, the movie has stuff on its mind, and it's not going to be quite the outright campy premise that you would think if you just, read a synopsis about it, that it's messing around with this guy's head, and doing interesting stuff like that. Because there's another moment where Jonathan goes to take a shower and he reaches for the shower knob and he recoils, and the shower knob is a hand that's kind of like flexing at him. And then we cut to his reaction shot, cut back, it's just a regular shower knob. I'm like, okay, that's fun and weird and nightmarish and in really cool ways. But unfortunately, I think there's so much of the movie that is kind of dramatically inert. And I think we can talk about this in depth, because one of the things that you really liked about the movie that I think is very noble about its intentions is that this is an honest to God character study about this guy, Jonathan Lansdale, and kind of his particular views on masculinity.
Right. Well, just his kind of worldview. What we come to figure out as we get further into the story is this ability to draw this comic mandro, which is, of course, a portmanteau of man, and then andro, which is Greek for man. His ability to draw this comic and come up with this character and, live vicariously through this character is sort of his pressure release valve. It is what allows him to sort of get his aggression out and cope with anxiety and anger. And now that he doesn't have this outlet anymore, his anger and his rage don't really have any other place to go. They just sort of sit in his head and boil. And then at this point in the movie, we think that maybe the hand is starting to act on some of these pent up feelings of rage, because there will be things like he'll have a dream one night and he sees like black and white visions of the hand moving around. And then in his waking hours, we see some evidence of maybe things that the hand has done. So it's this point where the psychic connection between him and this disembodied hand is established. And I thought, oh man, this is like Monkey Shines.
Yeah, definitely. It has a little bit of that Monkey Shines kind of take on it, where there's some other object that is being unconsciously controlled by the lead character. And that's certainly an interesting jumping off point. And I think the movie having those interests in mind about like, okay, well, this is about him exerting his sense of control and power over situations, either whether it be regarding his wife or their child or his career. That's kind of what the hand is representing. And early on, it's clear, like we said from the get-go, that him and his wife are having marital troubles. After he loses his hand, she's just even getting more distant. She wants to go to this, I think it's called the Origin Institute, which is this kind of yoga.
Sounds like a David Cronenberg thing.
Yeah, it's just a very, like, we see them kind of doing yoga, and they're very, modern, progressive, kind of self-helpy kind of thing. And his wife clearly has a thing for the head person at this place. And there's a point where Jonathan comes back to their apartment and sees them in a bedroom together, but they're not sleeping. They're like doing some kind of exercise or therapy or something. And he's immediately like, I mean, he may as well have caught them in bed together.
Sure. It's pretty clear that the wife has the hots for this yogi, this yoga instructor guy. And it's pretty clear that it's not just a matter of my wife is falling for another man. It's a conflicting worldviews thing. Like, this guy is sort of diametrically opposed to the simmering masculine, impotent rage, if you will, that Michael Caine's character has going on. And at this point, he's fitted with a prosthetic right hand. So that has some sort of basic movement. Really, all they did for Michael Caine is sort of fit him with what looks like a really rigid black leather glove. So it's not like a really big, bulky, fake hand that he has on. It's rather form-fitting. And basically, they do this at this point so that they don't have to get insert shots of his stump.
Right. Yeah, the whole thing about him and his, when I talk about his view on masculinity, this is where Oliver Stone's kind of aggressively liberal sensibilities come through. And I'm not saying that in a dismissive or, admiring way. It is just clear that that's what he wants to do with this character. Jonathan Lansdale makes so many mentions about kind of classic uber masculine ideals. For example, there's a part where he's having dinner, I think, with his wife and their child, and they're talking about the yogi guy who, of course, she's calling Uncle whoever. And they talk about something. It's like, oh yeah, he doesn't, we don't eat meat at his place. We don't eat anything. We just eat tofu and stuff. And this offends Jonathan Lansdale's sensibilities. He's very much like, oh, you're supposed to eat steak. How are you going to get protein? And then the biggest clear indicator of his feelings about masculinity is that after he's lost his hand, they want to give his Mandro comic to a new artist and writer, played by none other than Roger Rabbit himself, Charles Fleischer.
That's right.
Lovely to see him. And he sees the boards that Charles Fleischer has done, and Mandro all of a sudden has a bunch of thought bubbles, and he's thinking about what he's doing. And this completely offends Jonathan's belief about the character of Mandro.
Right. Well, it's not just, Jonathan losing his temper about his lack of control. Of course, it is about lack of control and that he no longer has control over his creation. and, you know, the other people don't seem to understand his creation. That's one thing. And that's definitely, you know, I can sympathize with that. Certainly. I think we've all had instances where we've felt similarly about something, but the fact that he goes off on him about like Mandro doesn't think, and you drew all these fucking bubbles of him thinking, and then very directly he says to the guy, look, you don't cut the balls off of Superman. And just to think, like, if you know enough about Superman, it's like to think that this guy idealizes Superman as some sort of like model of male virility is like, huh, okay. You start to understand his psychology a bit. And this is, I don't know, it's interesting in the way that this sort of mirrors things that we're talking about in pop culture now, and that, you know, certain types of comic book fans or fans who like certain comic book characters may show certain psychological traits and so on and so forth. It's kind of prescient in a way.
I think it adds another layer of interest to the movie, and you know, considering this is easily one of the more obscure things that we've done on the show, I think it's something to point kind of a neon sign at and say, hey, there's stuff in here that's worth checking out, that's kind of, you know, going on in the current discourse, oddly, about comic book characters and things like that, and what it reflects about their creators and artists and everything. So I like all that, but then the movie gets into this long stretch where Jonathan takes a teaching position, and he's basically teaching about comic art and stuff like that.
Right. At this point, he separates from his wife. He gets a job offer to teach at some sort of community college out in the woods of Northern California. And he takes the job. He says it's a good job offer. We're not quite sure if that's true or not, because he seems to live in this sort of, I don't know, ratty cabin. And I think he wants to be away from his wife and child because I think he senses a distance already growing there. But he's also pretty miserable that they won't come and see him. Sure,
but in this kind of self-exile that he's done, one of his students catches his eye. Her name's Stella.
Or does he catch her eye? I mean, she is like this ultimate fantasy.
Well, here's the thing. I kind of hated this entire chunk of the movie because Stella is clearly supposed to be, it's like, okay, we're doing the classic, you know, student falls in love with the teacher thing. But Stella is trying to be presented as written as another kind of very progressive, like very modern type of woman.
Right. She tells him exactly what it is that she wants. And, you know, she enjoys being desired and likes having control in a relationship. You know, definitely sort of a women's lib kind of figure.
Sure. I mean, even to where, you know, when they eventually start having sex, she is not just going to placate him. She's like, well, come on, like, do it. Like, start going. It's such a direct kind of attack to his masculinity. And it's like, okay, this is, again, interesting to throw up against him. But the movie kind of plays it as just, I don't know. I don't have any more familiarity with the source material than you do. But this feels like a chapter in the book where it's like, and then he had this thing with his student, but it didn't work out. And then he psychically got his hand to kill the guy that she was going to run off to Los Angeles with.
Yeah, it is a little bit episodic. You know, this whole section where he goes to California, it does feel like the movie is putting the brakes on for a bit and sort of spinning wheels until his wife and kid come out at Christmas time and the shit can really hit the fan. I do think that it, you know, putting him in this different situation and having him make friends with these college professors and, you know, having him interface with this sort of new young female energy. And then also we get the classes as a great device to figure out where his head is at, you know, how he thinks about art, because he does get a couple of lectures in the movie where he talks a little bit about how he feels about art, which is important. Sort of lets us into his headspace a little bit more. And Once he's alone in the cabin, though, there is some of my favorite atmospheric and moody stuff, though. There is, I don't know, a little bit more almost Evil Dead influence. There is, I mean, it's not quite as strong as Sam Raimi, and it's certainly not as strong stylistically as that scene in the field earlier on with the sort of roving camera. But that sort of, you know, cabin in the woods menace is there. It's pretty palpable.
I'll half agree with you. It's not bad.
No,
like,
not at all.
I don't think it's bad, but it was never. I think that's the thing, is that it never got to a level that was striking enough to really engage me in the mood and the atmosphere. I'll break out our favorite word on this show. It was functional for me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there in that the film is not, I don't know. I never got the sense that it was going above and beyond to execute this particular premise. I think it was executing it in a way that is, like you said, narratively functional, certainly not unstylish. I think it's a stylish movie. It's not an exercise in style, I don't think. Michael Caine is doing his best. I mean, if you go to the trivia page on IMDb for this movie, they call this one of Michael Caine's infamous, quote, paycheck movies. He says that he did this movie because he wanted to put a down payment on his garage. I give him a little bit more credit in this performance. I think he is getting a little hammy, particularly in this third act that we're coming to.
Well, the third act is really where the killer hand shenanigans take off. Earlier, there's been some stuff, for example, Jonathan gets assaulted by a bum played by Oliver Stone.
An amputee bum.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And the film then switches to black and white, and we see the hand strangling the bum to death in a pile of garbage. And these black and white transitions, this was where I was like, okay, this feels a little like the Oliver Stone I would come to know later as a director. He likes to do that kind of, you know, I always think about something like Natural Born Killers, where that is such an aggressively stylistic movie, to the point of mania. And it's clear that, you know, even stuff like The Doors that does kind of similar stuff. And I'm like, you know, if the movie had a touch of that, I might be able to tell you that this is an Oliver Stone movie. But if I didn't see his name in the credits and know he did this, like it doesn't have that kind of personal stamp that I think makes specifically a lot of horror movies really stand out from the crowd.
I might agree with you on that. I think there's a lot going on in the film technically that we haven't talked about yet that makes it stand out. I think more than we're giving it credit for. Like James Horner's score in this. This is no cheesy synth score. This is a big orchestral score of the quality that you would expect from James Horner. I actually don't know why I've never heard this mentioned before at all, because the score is real good. Like, real good.
Yeah, I like the score quite a bit. Talking about the look of the movie, like I say, I don't think it's a bad-looking movie by any means.
I think it's pretty well lit, actually, and some of the stylistic choices in lighting are really fun.
Sure, and I only have to bring this up because it's an amazing name. The cinematographer for this is King Baggett. who was the cinematographer? It's a great name. Who was also the cinematographer on stuff like Revenge of the Nerds and The Last Starfighter. Not movies that are known for their cinematography, but aren't bad looking movies. So yeah, I think technical wise, like I said, the direction is there. The look of the film is there. The mood, especially thanks to Horner's score, is there. But I don't know if it has the kind of, like, you keep bringing up Sam Raimi and talking about Evil Dead. It's like, it doesn't have that kind of distinctiveness. And that's another reason why I bring up the Amicus movies. I have a very soft spot in my heart for those movies, but the majority of them feel very much like anybody directed them. And I kind of get the same feeling with The Hand, where it's like, this is good, but it's not quite distinct enough to tip over into something really remarkable.
I also get the sense that this is sort of, you know, when we're talking about the early work of somebody who is now regarded as a really strong, stylish filmmaker, it's like, yeah, this is somebody who is first stepping into that sort of style. And Is it really, really confident in its style? Is it making really, really big, bold stylistic choices? It's not. No, in fact, it's playing it. I don't know. I think it's playing it pretty safe, but I think almost everything that it goes for stylistically, it's executing really, really well. You know, the lighting, you know, is one, I think, a good example of that. And as we get into the third act, the lighting gets a lot more extreme.
Sure. And again, the third act gives us more opportunities for there to be that kind of more distinct style, because this is when we're going to see the hand strangling people and crawling around. We get to see more effect shots of the hands. And I know that I think it was Stan Winston who said, it's like, we basically had a hand for every different type of motion. We had a strangling hand, one that would crawl, one that would kind of, you know, slink. They had different hands for different actions. And I wish there was more of the hand in the hand, because whenever they do stuff with it, it looks pretty darn good.
It does. And I never thought that I wanted more hand, because the movie has a really fine line to ride. At this point in the movie, all signs indicate at this point in the film, you know, as we're getting into the third act, we're nearing Christmas in the movie, like all signs point to the hand being real. It is a real thing in the world that is doing bad things.
Well, the biggest one for me as kind of an indicator that the hand is real is that we see Jonathan trying to draw with his left hand, and he clearly can't do it. And then he goes to sleep and he wakes up. I think this is after he's slept with Stella or had a dream or something, and he wakes up and there is a very intricate drawing of a naked woman with a giant hand grasping between her legs.
Yeah, and she's sort of riding one of the fingers, so to speak. Yeah, it's a very, very sexualized drawing. So it's at this point, you know, we're thinking, oh, the hand is leaving real world clues. He tried to leave it behind when he moved away to California, but it's followed him. And, you know, even earlier in the movie, before he moves to California, when he's having an argument with his wife, we see the hand sort of scoot under an end table. And it's like, okay, this is the first sort of indication where we're seeing the hand sort of share the same shot as other characters. You know, we're starting to think like this is really happening. And that idea is exciting.
It is. And then this third act where the hand has started killing people, like the guy that Stella was going to run off to Los Angeles with, played by Bruce McGill, and eventually Stella herself, that the hand is acting out these rage impulses that Jonathan is having, and the hand can, you know, go off and kill for him. Then, of course, Jonathan is convinced that the hand is real, that it's going to attack his wife. That there's a point where his wife and daughter are staying with him for Christmas, and he believes that the hand is attacking her, and he goes to, I think, stop it. And by doing that is like hitting his wife or something. And the daughter walks in and sees this and thinks that, you know, dad is hurting mom.
Right. Well, it's this, you know, again, it's riding this fine line of, you know, he thinks the hand is killing his wife, but he feels guilt about it in an instant, goes to try and rescue her. And then, of course, at that moment, the girl walks in and it looks like he has just beat the hell out of his wife. And then the hand has escaped out the window. So he's like, oh, there was a man here, a strange man here, and he escaped out the window. This is when the police show up and things get full tilt wacky.
Well, but before that, we have Michael Caine running out to a shed. And this is where the inescapable, like when I mentioned earlier, the inescapable silliness of the premise comes through. Michael Caine has to fight a disembodied hand. and having this be the kind of the climax of the movie, I was like, you know, I wish I was enjoying this more, because it is fun in the way any disembodied hand movie would be.
Oh, yeah.
But the movie has been so deliberate in its tone that this, instead of feeling like kind of a fun payoff, feels really out of place.
I mean, let's be realistic. We've all seen Evil Dead 2. Can we really ever watch a movie where a man fights his own disembodied hand And can it ever measure up to Evil Dead 2?
Well, more so, can that idea, which I know they did in one of the Amicus movies, I think it's Michael Goff's hand that gets chopped off. He might even be an artist. And it's like, oh, okay, is this even an idea that we can take with a modicum of sincerity? And for the majority of the hand, it's really trying to sell that sincerity. So when you get to a scene where Michael Caine is egging all over his garage with a fake hand to his neck, it's like, uh-oh.
I felt the exact opposite way. I thought, yes, please. Yes, I was waiting for this showdown between Michael Caine and his fucking rotten hand. I was really, I was into the movie. And I'm sorry you weren't as into the movie as I was, but it was at this scene where I thought, I signed up for this. And I'm getting the scene that I wanted. Is it Evil Dead 2? No, but if I wanted Evil Dead 2, I just would have watched that to begin with.
It's not so much about it being Evil Dead 2 is that, like, having the showdown with the hand feels like it comes out of the movie you would think a movie about a killer hand would be, whereas this much more kind of fascinating psychological horror drama that was going on is like, okay, we're going to do a killer hand movie that's actually going to try and have more depth to it and do some weirder things and make you potentially think, well, is the hand actually real, or is this just Michael Caine's kind of imagination? But
at some point the movie has got to go there, or otherwise people are going to go, I'm tired of this sort of shit or get off the pot, feeling. It's just like the movie's got to go there and do something with it. Like, I feel like if it hadn't gone to that place, it would have been wasted time.
Well, I think it's more less than wasted time. It's more so that it's about marquee value. Like, you see a poster that says Michael Caine, the hand, and a picture of a disembodied hand. You're like, oh, Michael Caine's going to fight a zombie hand.
I sure fucking hope so. And guess what? It does indeed happen. I think there are better executions of similar premises. Monkey shines. But, the fact that he does indeed get to fight the hand is really, really, I don't know. It's probably the central scene of the movie for me. Okay. There is a really great scene at the end, but
we'll talk about that. I mean, you say monkey shines, and I just think about, it's like, well, Michael Caine never gets to like talk to the hand like the guy in Monkey Shines. When the guy in Monkey Shines is talking to the monkey, you're going like, "You're slime,
you're filth." Like, well. And there is that same sort of like non-diegetic kind of hallucinatory imagery where Jason Baggy in Monkey Shines, in a few shots has like monkey makeup on, the monkey teeth and stuff like that. It's like, man, this is just hitting the sweet spot.
I mean, yeah, we love, go listen to our Monkey Shines episode. We had a lot of fun with that movie.
Yeah, it's pretty much the shelf pick at this point. The closest thing that I can think of that we've already done on the show. Monkey Shines is very good, by the way, folks. So this showdown with the hand happens, and it kind of ends in a lackluster way. He just sort of falls on the ground, and the hand sort of climbs into his shirt, and you think, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? He passes out. When he wakes up, the cops are there. And you think, well, this guy's either going to get nailed or he's going to be vindicated. At this point, he's completely off his rocker. He's doing the full-on yelling Michael Caine routine. And Rob Brydon and Steve Coogan are having a ball with it.
Right. I mean, this is basically the point where, like, I saw the buildup. It's like, okay, they keep talking about, these people that are missing. He has his car, they're in the garage.
You're here because you think I've done something. I haven't done with you. Don't you think I've done something?
Yeah. So they're like, we smell that there's, they keep alluding to like, oh, something smells really bad in here. So they open up the trunk, and of course it's the bodies of Stella and the guy she was going to run away with. And Stella is making a wonderful cross-eyed death face.
Oh, God, yeah. And then Michael Caine's reaction shot to seeing the bodies in the trunk is like, yes, thank you.
So then, of course, the police arrest him. And then the movie ends with, this is the best scene in the movie for me.
It is really, really good.
I'm like, if this had been the caliber of the entirety of the movie, I would have fallen in love with this, because
it feels like it's something right at a creep show.
This is total creep show. And because Vivica Linford shows up as the doctor who's analyzing Jonathan at the end and telling him, like, okay, the hand was not real. It was a manifestation of your anger and your rage. And when you would murder, like, that's, you know, you were doing these killings, but you attributed it to your severed hand. And the set is great. It's just this room with like a checkerboard floor.
Well, the lighting, his makeup, his hair is done so well.
It's so cool.
Yeah. The way his backlit, like the way that his hair sort of lights in the backlight is just so wonderful. Yeah, there's nothing I don't like about this particular scene. Vivica Linford's accent, of course, is nothing but perfect.
It's one, you know, she's just going on about, you know, she's basically doing the doctor at the end of Psycho type speech, you know, telling the audience, like, this is what was going on and yada, yada, yada. But then she's like asking Jonathan, where's the hand right now? And he's like, it's around your throat. And of course, we don't see anything. We're like, oh, okay, he is crazy. But then the hand shows up and kills Vivica Linford in a great, like, maybe 1 second shot of her on the ground and what looks like it might be a fake head. It might be her face. I don't know.
It's a bunch of fake blood comes out of the back of her head all over like the black and white checker
so
tile.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a great ending for this movie. Like, and I think, like you said, it's one of the best scenes in the movie, if not the absolute best scene.
It's my favorite scene.
Okay, and I think I can totally see why, because it's fucking great. I do wish more of the movie were like this. That is something I wish. I had a really good time with The Hand. I think it approached its material with a surprising amount of sincerity, but it earns quite a bit of sincerity through good performances. And even if Michael Caine isn't giving this like what we would consider A+ work, he's still doing a good job because it's fucking Michael Caine. It's a pleasure to watch the guy act.
Well, like I said, this is why the Amicus movies would get people like Michael Goff and Herbert Lom and all these people, where it's like they are dependable, steadfast British actors who can anchor the dumbest of movies and make you buy into it. And that's what Michael Caine does. Like he anchors the movie in a really strong way. I wish I liked the movie more. I don't think it's a bad movie at all. I just think it's kind of the potential that I see in there is so much more, because there's so much, like, I love all of the psychological stuff. Like I said, the lobster curling and the
hallucinatory stuff.
Yeah. The hallucinatory stuff is great. The ending scene is by far my favorite. I'm like, man, if that's the way you got to go, which it still leaves it ambiguous. Like, well, did the hand actually show up and kill her? Or is this Michael Caine's vision of him killing this woman? We don't know. It just ends.
Yep.
I'm like, cool. I'm cool with that. Like, that's fine. And of course it goes out on like a shot of him smiling and laughing and stuff like that. I'm like, this is perfect. This is classic horror book, horror comic book ending.
Right. And it's embracing the camp in that moment.
It's
doing a good job of it. No, I mean, the movie is not a terribly campy movie, but that is a campy scene.
I don't think it's camp. I think it's really kind of where you say camp, I think it's classical. Like,
I think it does have a display of classicism, but it does so, I think, with a knowledge of just how silly it's being in a great way.
In a way that's, I think the camp element would have some kind of meta awareness and poking fun. It's like, no, this is it's reveling in the fact that it gets to end like this.
Yeah. I mean, I hope Michael Caine had a good time shooting that scene, because like even just his makeup in that scene is so good.
Oh, I'm sure.
The big sunken eyes. He's got tears streaming down his face.
I'm sure you're considering that screen cap for the thumbnail of this episode.
No, it's going to be the scene where the hand, or no, it's his reaction shot from when the cops make him open the trunk, where he's so perfectly backlit and like all of his hair is sort of haloing out behind his head, and they have the light right on his eyes. It's such a great shot of him. It's probably one of my favorite reaction shots of Michael Caine ever, probably.
There you go.
At least the movie gave me that.
I'm glad I finally saw this movie. Like I said, I've known about it kind of on the fringes of discussion, but never heard anybody really talk about it. I'm even though I wasn't as enthused with the movie as you are, I still give it a recommendation if it's something that sounds interesting to people, because I think there's enough there that does set it apart as far as the script is concerned. Mm-hmm. I think the execution is what prevents it from really kind of raising above itself.
It certainly could have gone a little bit further, given us a little bit more. But I think, like Oliver Stone's best work, it's a good mix of the classical, the modern, and then there's a fair shot of sleaze in it as well, which certainly helps. I think that makes the film a little bit more watchable. If it were just some sort of stuck-up psychological horror about this guy, then I wouldn't have a whole lot of interest. But of course, the sleaze element is a little bit fun. Yeah. If you wanted to pull something off the shelf to recommend that people watch either instead or in addition to this movie, what would you pull off the shelf today, sir?
Well, before I do that, I do want to recommend that everybody go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with their own shelf picks. We always love hearing those. My shelf pick is kind of, if you're going to watch a killer hand movie, you got to go with one of the classics, and that is The Hands of Orlock from 1924. This is from the same director that did Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It also stars Conrad Veidt. This is kind of the ground zero killer hand movie. This is about a pianist who loses his hands and gets hands transplanted, but the hands that he got transplanted onto him were the hands of a murderer. So they're murdering people of their own will. It's wonderful considering, during that entire German expressionism movement, which is very much like you're either in or out with that stuff. I'm very into it. This is one that doesn't get brought up as much. And I think because it's not quite as in your face as a lot of the German expressionist stuff, it's not as abstract or kind of striking as something like Caligari or even Murnau's stuff. But it's a really good little silent film. Conrad Veidt's great in it. It's one, that I think it has its small circle of supporters, but I think about that Portlandia Cabinet of Dr. Caligari sketch, which is a great one. And it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of a great little film to pluck out as a very distinct film snobby pick. I feel like that's how Hands of Orlock should be. It's not one that I see brought up in enough kind of discussions about that era of horror cinema. It's a really solid one. I would recommend it if people have the tolerance and the interest in that period to watch those kind of movies. Hands of Orlock. But how about you, Travis? What are you going to pull off the shelf?
This is another horror film, certainly a horror story, a classic horror story that does have an all-time Michael Caine performance in it. And it does indeed feature a moment where he has a hallucinatory sort of vision of somebody's head on a door knocker, kind of like the shower knob scene. This, of course, if you haven't figured it out already, is Muppet Christmas Carol,
which we did an episode on, and you should listen to because we love that movie.
Yes. So if you want to see, of course, Michael Caine doing, I think one of his absolute best performances as Ebenezer Scrooge in a horror story is Muppet Christmas Carol. Fully embraces its genre elements. As a matter of fact, the movie even has to point out how hard it's embracing its genre elements when Rizzo mentions to Gonzo, like, how scary this is. And Gonzo basically says, like, kids can handle it. This is, this is art.
It's culture.
Yeah, it's culture.
Yeah. Well, I even like during the entire Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come segment where Rizzo and Gonzo peek their heads out and they're like, this is even too scary for me. And Gonzo's like, for once I agree with the rat. We'll see you at the climax, folks.
And it's cool because they actually let the meta comedy of the movie skip out and they're like, we need to focus on the drama of this climax and we need to focus on the fear and the grief and the guilt. You know, this is a psychological examination of guilt, whereas The Hand is a psychological examination of male rage. This is an examination of a man who feels guilty deep down inside, but of course has to have a supernatural experience to bring that out of him. It's really good.
Love it. I mean, just talking about it, I'm excited for Christmas to roll around because it's just another excuse to watch Muppet Christmas Carol.
Isn't it lovely? Yeah.
It's a thing I get to look forward to every year. Fantastic. Well, let's do some currently consuming. Nom, 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 nom. Travis, what's been on your plate?
Well, there's a podcast. I think I've spoken about it on Currently Consuming before, but it just finished another big arc. This is a role-playing podcast called The Adventure Zone, hosted by the McElroy family. It's three brothers who also host the podcast My Brother, and Me, and their dad, who was a radio host for many years, and of course has the voice to prove it. So these four guys decided to do a Dungeons and Dragons campaign as part of one of their other podcasts, and it took off. They described it as a car that could fly. Like they figured out that they had this thing and suddenly it started behaving in ways and zooming off at this unprecedented speed. You know, one of the brothers described, you know, he's like, my brother and me has fans, but the Adventure Zone has a following. It's a big deal. Teens really like it. Millennials really like it. And it has its own graphic novel series now. It's kind of a cultural moment. And they just finished another big story. The story was called Amnesty, and it wasn't a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. It was actually a campaign done in a game called Monster of the Week. And Monster of the Week is based on the Powered by the Apocalypse gaming system. It's a simpler system, much, much simpler than Dungeons and Dragons. Fewer dice, and it's a more, I don't know, it's a little bit more organic of a series or a story that isn't so focused on the fickle hand of fate, you know, and the dice roll. They can be a little bit more daring with where the story goes. It's not under such tight control by the dungeon master.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I have no knowledge of this other than what you've told me, but I think you should take the moment to kind of promote your own little piece of art that you made in regards to this.
Yeah, I did a little bit of music inspired by the show, like Griffin McElroy, who is the dungeon master of the prior campaign, and I think they call him the Keeper. That's the role in the whatchamacallit, Monster of the Week game system. So he composes all the music for the show as well. So this really is a big artistic effort from these guys. You know, it's one of their sort of purest expressions of who they are as artists. Mm-hmm. And some of the music for the series is really quite good, and I decided to do a little bit of a riff on it. And I put that on my YouTube page. I guess I can link to it if people are interested. But I would really rather people go and listen to the show. It's pretty remarkable. It's funny, certainly, but it also earns some big dramatic beats. Like today was the finale for Taz Amnesty, the Adventure Zone Amnesty, which was a story set in West Virginia, their home state. So it was something that was personal on a different level. Like their big D&D campaign was this unbelievably huge, you know, cosmic story, you know, apocalyptic scale. And then Taz Amnesty was something more intimate. Of course, it has like bigger sci-fi elements in it, but it definitely feels like it's closer to home, like literally for them. So I had fun with it. The campaign is a totally different structure, you know, whereas, you know, the Adventure Zone Balance, as it's called, which was their first huge arc, was definitely written really, really cinematically, really, really strictly by the end of it. And so they kind of had to fake playing Dungeons and Dragons in order to complete it. This is more of an actual gameplay of a story that is, or actual gameplay of a game that is more focused on story and not just like combat and dice rolls.
Okay.
So I recommend it for anybody who's into role playing. The Powered by the Apocalypse game system is interesting and versatile, and you should definitely do some research into it because it's highly unlike Dungeons and Dragons in that way. I think everybody just has 2 D6s.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
That's all you need. Yeah, and I think as Monster of the Week, everybody, like, no matter what level they're at, I think everybody just has 7 hit points.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
So, very, very different system than Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, the Adventure Zone, I will link to it in the show notes at GenreVision.com. Please check that out there. What, sir, have you been currently consuming?
Well, since this episode will be coming out in October, I wanted to do something horror-oriented, something recent, and I finally caught up with the most recent entry in the Conjuring universe, Annabelle Comes Home.
As I called it, Annabelle Homecoming.
Yeah, right. I have not seen The Nun or The Curse of La Llorona. Yeah, sure.
I did see The Nun, if you're curious.
Oh, yeah, you did see The Nun. How was that?
It's so okay. It was interesting to see the Conjuring series actually sort of embrace an R rating for once.
Sure.
Whereas the rest of the movies are just sort of like, just give us an R rating and we'll go away. And the MPA is like, but you should have gotten a PG-13. And they're like, you know what? Just give us the R. People eat it up.
That's definitely the case here with Annabelle Comes Home. I think in my review that I wrote for Annabelle Creation, I said that this is kind of an R rating in the most liberal of terms because it's so clear that this is a movie intended for a younger audience. And when I mean younger, I mean like preteens.
Oh, yeah. 12, 13. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that they love. The creepy doll movies.
And Annabelle Comes Home even more so leans into that. This is directed by Gary Dauberman. I think this is his directorial debut.
Well, for people who don't know who Gary Dauberman is, who is Gary Dauberman?
He is the guy that has been making every horror movie for Warner Brothers since The Conjuring, basically.
Yeah.
He's been the script writer for a ton of those movies. He was the guy who came on and rewrote the Cary Fukunaga and Chase Palmer draft for It. He has the sole writing credit. Oh, no, I think it's him and Andy Muschietti have writing credits for It Chapter 2. So he's the Warner Brothers horror guy, and they gave him his own Annabelle movie to play with. And the premise being that it's going to be the Warrens' haunted museum that's in their basement going nutso.
Which is a fun concept for a Conjuring movie, frankly.
Well, and honestly, it's the best one to kind of do with kids, because the entire setup is that the Warrens' daughter is being babysat while they're out of town doing some conjuring stuff. And, whatever they're doing, because they're only bookended in the movie. Like Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga only show up in the beginning and the end of the movie. And the real story is about this babysitter, the daughter, and the babysitter's friend. And I don't want to spoil anything for anybody that's interested in it, but it starts off and you're like, okay, I see what the character types are. I see where this is going. But the movie reveals some interesting character stuff along the way that I was like, okay, all right, that's not bad. And I was shocked at how restrained the movie was for a Conjuring entry.
Restrained how? Because, Conjuring's not all that... it's not all that out there. It's not all that wacky.
No, I would think the Conjuring movies are, because they like to... In terms of, like, shit doesn't really start happening until the movie's over halfway done.
Okay.
Like,
I guess Conjuring 2 is kind of big and wacky, but especially by the end.
Well, they still, the Conjuring movies still like to have their little seeds of like, and then there's a ghost in the corner, and there's a lady hanging on a tree.
I like that you said ghost.
Yeah, that's how it feels,
Conjuring 5, the ghost.
The ghosts. Whereas this one takes its time. It does some more kind of subtle, there's is that somebody in the background that is just staring at us out of focus kind of stuff? I'm like, oh, okay, that's nifty.
What's going to happen is the Conjuring movies are eventually going to get populated by younger and younger children. So this one is early teenagers, right? It's like the protagonist, she's like in her early teens, I guess.
I'd say like 16, 17, and then the kid, like they're the Warrens' kid, who's got to be probably like 12, 13 or something.
Sure. And then by the time they get to the, like, I don't know, 3 movies down the line, it's all going to be a bunch of 7-year-olds, like, basically dressed up like Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson. There was a ghost behind the cabinet.
I mean, this movie does, I couldn't help but laugh, but when they get the Annabelle doll in the beginning and they have to put it in its case and bless it, Vera Farmiga has to say, "The evil is contained." It's just great.
This house is clean.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I think I texted you, it was like, I've never seen a movie that was more kind of baked to be a Halloween Horror Nights haunted house. Like there's stuff in the movie that doesn't work in that regard, but they come up with some fun, creepy ideas. Again, I don't want to spoil specifics for people. But I know you weren't as crazy as about Annabelle Creation as I was.
I was okay.
I liked it because, again, it was like, oh, yay, horror movies for kids that aren't Goosebumps. You know, that they're really realizing, like, this is a market we need to tap into. And we talked about that in our Patreon episode about scary stories to tell in the dark, which is still, I think, kind of a higher standard for these kind of flicks.
If you liked Annabelle Creation, you should watch Ouija Origin of Evil.
The Mike Flanagan one?
Absolutely, because it's a pastiche movie. It's not just like a movie that sort of imitates as a period piece. It's not just like period horror. It's full on pastiche. Like, they actually put cigarette burns in the corners of the of the movie when they do real changes.
Ugh, okay.
So it's fun. It's really fun to see Flanagan, who, you know, as a stylist, it can be really, really straight faced and has like a really strict particular style. Like, Dr. Sleep looks really, really strongly like Haunting of Hill House. So to see him sort of branch out into sillier styles is really fun.
Oh, then I might put that on my Halloween list.
Ouija Origin of Evil, I think, is a good one. I think one of the girls from that movie is also one of the girls from Annabelle Creation too, so it shares some DNA. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Annabelle Comes Home, I think this may be a low bar for a lot of people, but I think it's the best Annabelle movie. The first one is the only one that I outright don't recommend at all.
Well, nobody liked it.
I think it's a really boring movie and really cheap and cheaply made. 2 at least has some fun Spookablast sensibilities, and 3 kind of runs with that in a really great way. A lot of it is going to be, again, very kind of simplistic, and I don't think it's a movie where I have to realize, like, oh, this isn't trying to scare a 30-year-old man. It's trying to scare a 13-year-old.
Sure. And if you can embrace that and have fun with it, I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah. And I did. There's stuff in the movie that I was like, that is pretty fun and clever. And if I showed that to like a 10-year-old, they would lose their mind. So it's like, cool. All right. Fun.
Yeah. The Nun, I think, was aiming a bit higher in that the themes weren't necessarily all that much more mature. You know, the characters were adults, which I guess sets it apart. But it's not like the movie was at all deep, you know, on any level thematically. I mean, if you want to watch a spooky nun movie that has deep thematics, just go watch Black Narcissus, and it's like stylistically way better than anything in the Conjuring universe. So,
well, and it's the same. I mean, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but with Annabelle Comes Home, I can't really get into thematics, but there is a character arc with a certain character that's like, oh, okay, well, that could have just been a very stereotypical kind of Friday the 13th type person to have in your ensemble, but they added a little something it's just enough. Like, it's like, oh yeah, okay, good. That makes a little more sense.
Are they gay?
No.
Oh, okay. That was going to be my first guess.
No. Again, I don't want to spoil anything because it was a genuine like, oh, that's why they're doing that. But yeah, I think it's a fun flick for kids. Like, I can't believe it has an R rating. Like, this is the softest R I've seen in so long. The other Conjuring movies, at least I can like pinpoint certain things. I'm like, yeah, that's something the ratings board would take issue with and is enough to give them an R. This one, it's like somebody gets ghost stabbed and that's it. Like, that's it.
Well, you gave me all I needed to know about this as a Conjuring movie. You were like, well, a little girl is in bed and then like a Spookablast ghosty ghost a ghost grabs her foot and yanks it. I was like, oh, well, that's in every fucking Conjuring movie. So,
well, I think the thing I sent you specifically was like a little girl just had her leg pulled in bed. It's an official Conjuring entry now.
What is it with these fucking creepy ass demons with their little girl foot obsession?
I don't know. Yeah, they're all checking out wiki feed in the afterlife.
Ugh.
Well, on that note, I think we'll end this episode because, like we said,
the indication of something really bad going on is if these scenes weren't in the scripts before, and then Gary Dauberman got his hands on them and was like, you know what, this movie is distinctly lacking.
When we get his, if he's still attached to the Are You Afraid of the Dark movie, it's going to be like, oh, it's this monster that eats your feet while you sleep. I'm like, I think Gary's got something going on here.
Yeah. I think that movie is fully on hold because the Are You Afraid of the Dark TV movie that's coming out.
Yeah, the mini series that they're doing. Yeah,
the trailer is actually kind of impressive.
Hey, and it's got not David Diggs from Blind Spotting in it.
That's right, Rafael Casal.
Yeah, and I'm like, hey, all right. I mean, I'm already in the bag for an Are You Afraid of the Dark thing, but and I also think the writer of that, Ben David Grabensky, is now attached to the actual movie that they're going to make.
Good for him. But I thought the trailer for that was like surprisingly not precious. I was like, this looks like an update should. Like it seems to actually have some teeth to it. I liked it.
Yeah, there's moments in that trailer where I was like, I think there was one where like somebody's in some water and like a water monster jumped up from behind him. It's like, oh yeah, that would have got me if I was 10.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a real, like, honest to goodness horror film. So
yeah, good for it.
It's nice to see.
Well, as we continue on in October, we're not exactly doing a horror theme month, but maybe, I don't know, because next week we'll be doing Ang Lee's The Hulk, which Travis has not seen. I have, but not since it like first hit video.
It's a monster movie.
It is a monster movie, and it's a surprisingly dark movie for a Hulk movie, considering what we kind of think of as the Hulk now. So I'm so excited to revisit that and to get Travis's fresh take on it, and especially because I think, as we talked about different superhero cinema on this show, I think, this being the movie that came out, I think it's like a year after Sam Raimi's Spider-Man came out.
I forget. This was all a big blur for me. I've never seen it before, but I'm very excited to see it now, and you will hear about it next week.
Yeah, so as always, we want to thank you guys so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.
Ghost.
A ghost pulled my wig, Daddy.